Without a shadow of a doubt, it's the crunkiest show in social media history. I want to welcome you to another episode of the War Zone. I got my good friend in the building, Donovan Sadiq, the Queen, Demetra K. And man, if you ever been to court, you want to make sure that you're sitting in front of a good judge. We got Judge David Newell in the building, Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. Some of y'all know what an appeal is. You ain't take the deal, so you get the appeal. So we're gonna talk about it tonight, man. Let's get ready. Say, man, I want to welcome you to another episode of the War Zone and tell you thank you for tuning in, because you could be anywhere else. You definitely do not have to be here. So we know you're the greatest audience in the world. So thank you for tuning in. I started off with this here. We know Nfac is going to Lafayette, Louisiana this Saturday. They're going into formation, not just for Trafer Pellerin, but for a lot of good dudes in the state of Louisiana that have been, murdered by, some people say unjustly at the hands of law enforcement. So Nfac will be there. I want to bring some clarity to something because there's mass confusion. I initially put the stuff out that Nfac was coming to Lafayette. At that time, there was a miscommunication, and I shouldn't have put it out that fast, But from a reporter standpoint, I'll say this here: I shouldn't have put it out at all, because I'm a reporter. I never thought I'd be a reporter. I always thought I'd be a midget wrestler, but I'm a reporter, so I shouldn't have put it out. And I put it out, and it got some people, nerves a little bad. But I want to say this about Nfac, man, that I've never seen them involved in anything that was considered a riot. I've never seen one of their formations where things really got out of control. So to even consider coming to Lafayette, Louisiana, to me is a blessing in disguise, because everybody needs to understand their constitutional rights. And your constitutional rights to peacefully protest and bear arms is something that somebody cannot take away from you. So they will be there Saturday. And I think that no matter who you may be, if you support the Constitution, remember, I had to fight for the Constitution when I sued the school board. If you support the Constitution, the right to bear arms, I think you should be there. I think it'll be a peaceful situation. I think, I know it'll be a peaceful situation. And I think people need to show up and support these brothers. I mean, it's been a long time since we've seen a bunch of black brothers marching down the streets with a whole bunch of guns. You know what I'm talking about, back in the 60s with the originators, Hewitt P. Newton and my man Bobby Seals crunked it up. So, gonna be a peaceful situation. They coming. If you're in the area, man, how can I say it? Stop by. Just stop by. Another thing, I talked about it earlier on the show. Donovan, I don't know if he heard, but former FBI Chuck Mahler, FBI agent Chuck Mahler, got a call today from Lance Gilliam. We know Lance, involved in the deals with Rodney Ellis's wife and all that stuff there. And Lance wanted Chuck to do some surveillance on an abandoned building in the middle of nowhere, and wanted him to stay until it got dark. Lance, we ain't stupid, dude. So Chuck called him back. They had one phone call. Chuck called him back, let him know who he is, let him know he investigating Ellis. So, the thing is, he kind of told him, man, you must think I'm stupid. I kind of figured out what y'all trying to do, but since you're trying to do that, we're going to ramp up the efforts. So, if you're out there doing something illegal, then, maybe one day you might end up in David Newell's courtroom trying to get you an appeal, but if you ain't doing nothing illegal, you ain't got nothing to worry about. They broke in Chuck's truck last week. He had money in the truck. He had a pistol in the truck, and all y'all took was an empty computer bag. Now, I ain't gonna say too much, but I got my mask on today. I feel left out of the party. They threatened Aubrey. They threatened Chuck. Why won't nobody threaten me? Come on, man. Don't leave me at the party, man. I'm gonna turn this over to Demetri. How you doing, sweetie?
So hello, everybody. I hope you guys are having a fabulous Monday evening. Thank you for joining us on the War Zone. As you guys can see, we have Judge David Newell, and we are going to get into it for the next hour or so. Just getting to know more about him, and he's going to tell us why we should vote for. Well, not we, because I can't. I'm in Southern California, but you all could vote for him. And so before we get into it with the Judge Donovan, what say you?
Hey everybody, welcome to the War Zone. And again, we are with Judge David Newell. Sorry about that. But quickly in the news, it's all been out there. The great businessman, or is he a con man? $750 he has paid in taxes in his last audit. The last 2 years, he has to be audited. And again, we're not Trump supporters, but I'm not against the man either. But if we don't pay our fair share of taxes, we can't fund the military. We can't fund our infrastructure. We can't fund the safety net. So everybody needs to pay their fair share. In 1950, to be a rich person, you paid a tax thing of 70%. It's at 24% now, and they keep cutting it, and they keep cutting it. In conjunction with that, you look at our infrastructure and you look at our country and how it looks. That's what happens when the people that have the most money don't pay their fair share in tax. And I'm not just talking individual people, I'm talking corporations. So we'll see how that pans out.
You were talking about Trump and his taxes? Demetri, can I say this? You might think about it differently. Maybe the judge will too. Ain't them the same tax laws that we can use?
From what I understand, if we have that kind of money, yeah.
So we need to stop trying to use other people's kids and trying to earn income credit, right? If we want to do what Trump do, then go look up them tax laws or find you a real good tax man that can help you do the same thing.
Are you all sure you wanted me on this show?
Say, man, I
mean, this episode, you guys are really putting me in it here, man.
I want to introduce y'all, man. I mean, yesterday we had a good judge on here. Tonight we got a great judge on here too. Judge David Newell, Texas Criminal Court of Appeals. And tonight we're gonna peel back the layers of the onion on the Texas Criminal Court of Appeals so that you can get a clear understanding of exactly what's going on. My man is running for office, and if 5-star endorse him, then it's real. So when I go in the voting booth, y'all already know when his race pop up on my screen, because I don't care if they have straight ticket voting. I don't do that. I go down the list, and I vote individual races, every last one of them, and I will definitely vote for this man. But tonight you're gonna get to know him just like I got to know him, and hopefully Demetri is not too tough on him, because some nights she could be a poodle or a pit bull, just depending on the day of the week. So we're gonna let Demetri crank it up. You go for it.
All right, so why don't you start, Judge, telling us something about yourself? Like, how did you become a judge?
Okay, well, that's a long story, but I'll try and just emphasize that I've been a prosecutor for doing criminal appeals and trying cases. I started trying cases, and in my spare time I did criminal appeals, and I studied the court very well. And there were 3 openings back in 2014. 3 judges were going to step down, and I did what any other sensible person would do. I tried to get my boss, the chief of the appellate division, to run. And say, I'm not gonna, but he did not want to do that, and so I stepped in. I threw my name in the hat, or my hat in the ring, because I was very familiar with the court, and I wanted to make sure that we had good judges of integrity on the court that could make good, sound decisions, that could make them understandable, write good opinions for folks, so that they would understand them, and that's why I did it. I did that in 2014. I won, and I've been on the court since 2015. So, one of the examples I gave was, I can give you an example as a prosecutor. one of the things that I think is sort of sets me apart is we had a case called In Re JW. He was a juvenile. And he was in the back seat of a car when two of his buddies decided they were going to carjack the car next to him. And those guys jumped out and they carjacked the guy. And then the police somehow located the juvenile, and he cooperated. He gave them all the information, and then they charged him as an accomplice. And once you get an appeal, he's already been convicted, right? And so the job of an appellate attorney is to sort of decide whether or not this is something that you think should stand, or whether you can, and how to defend that verdict. And I said to my supervisors, you can't defend this. I went all the way I went to every supervisor I could to say, this is the reason why under the law, this kid should not have been charged. And they agreed with me. I persuaded them. They agreed with me. And so I went in the appeal. And even as a prosecutor, I asked the Court of Appeals to enter an acquittal, which they did. And so my take is that I think that you want judges that have that kind of character on the bench. You know, I certainly look at these cases, and for those of you who don't know, the Court of Appeals is an appellate court, so it's a little bit different than your trial court. But you want someone that's going to, you know, not only can they find or write opinions or make decisions that make it easier for police officers to go after the right person, but you want to make sure that they have the character to stand up and say, you got the wrong guy, and you should redo it, and you should undo this conviction. And I think that my record has shown that I'm that kind of a judge.
So let me ask you this too. You were an appellate DA for about 17 years, and part of your campaign, I guess one of your slogans is that you try not to, or you don't rather legislate from the bench. So what do you do in order not to do that? And can you explain what the difference is between a prosecutor and a judge?
Sure. A prosecutor, and one of the things I've noticed as a judge is how easy it is to see things in black and white when you're an advocate. You know, it's just really easy to do. Once you're a judge, you have so many different layers of decision making you have to engage in. And as far as not legislating from the bench, you don't want to legislate from the bench. I mean that in a very, very, not only in a practical sense, but an ideological sense. In a practical sense, courts aren't really made to be like a legislature. Like if you think about how you get law passed, you can get a bunch of different legislators together. You got people from all over the state to come up and draft something to say, this is how we're going to do stuff. And they'll have a million different perspectives on how to do it. And they'll refine that law to make it really work. But when you're on an appeals court, we only have 9 people in our court. We can't have hearings. We can only focus on that one case in front of us. We just don't have the wherewithal to come up with a broad sort of plan to try and fix policy or enact policy. So it's just really difficult for us to do it. As far as what it means for me, though, you know, the thing I try to do is I always try to go, look, this statute, I have to go by the terms of a statute, even if I think that it was badly written. I even have an opinion once where I said, you know, all we're asked to do is say that a statute is constitutional, and you should get a stamp that says stupid but constitutional. You know, some laws are not well drafted, and the judge's job isn't to sort of say, well, it's not well drafted, so I'm going to rewrite it. You can't do that. You're sort of stuck with the bad consequences from some of these poorly written laws. And that's one thing that I do is that I adhere to the text of a statute when I interpret it. I adhere to the text of the Constitution when I'm having to interpret the Texas or the federal Constitution. And also the other thing I do that I think that is really important is I question my assumptions all the time. One of the things that I think is really, really important, if there's a danger for a judge, is they talk about black robe-itis. And judges tend to put on that robe and get really excited about their power, you know? And I don't like that. I'm not exactly thrilled to I wear my robe when there's oral argument, but I don't really, I'm trying to do the small thing. I'm trying to be as look, I want to do no harm. I want to be the most restrained thing I can. I want to not try and reach out there and sort of say, you know what, this is what I think is really going to fix everything. I'm just there to make sure that I do a good job with that case that's in front of me. Because if I do that, if I do a really good job with that case, it's going to echo into eternity, And that's the way I approach it, is that I constantly wonder, am I not seeing something? Is there something I'm missing? I have to be really candid with myself and have to be self-aware enough to do that. And I ask that question to my staff all the time. what am I missing? Am I missing something? Is there a different way of looking at it? So that's the way I try to approach things.
Okay, hey Judge, I'm also in Southern California, so we're gonna, a lot of stuff is happening in the news and things like that. But one of the problems that I've been noticed, well, it's not a problem. I just noticed that, for some reason, the system basically acts like this. Like you were a prosecutor for many, many years. Now, in those many years of being a prosecutor, you actually form relationships with the police department, and other judges. So, you might get, when you're on the court later on like that. Do you think that that is a problem in the judiciary system? Because with the Breonna Taylor case that recently just came down, they just found that cops went back to remove some of the bullets casings, and all kinds of malfeasances going on. And it's like, and no disrespect to the court, because I don't want to be locked up. It seems like you guys all work together when you should be separate and not have these interpersonal relationships so that you can make better decisions. What is your take on that?
Well, I think that one of the things that you're not seeing is that with regard to criminal law especially, there's also that kind of close relationship with the defense bar as well. The truth is that you're dealing with a lot of, when you're talking about attorneys, you're dealing with a lot of repeat players as well. You're going to see those guys again and again and again. Now, I will acknowledge having a good, having worked with police officers, less so once I got into appeals, but I specifically went to teach at the academy to try and make sure that they understood the limits of what their authority was. So that's one of the things that I always tried to do. I understand that people are very concerned about things like that, and I understand the concern. I can't tell you so much about Breonna Taylor because that's another jurisdiction, so I don't know all their laws, but I did understand that one of the things that they had going on with that case is that their laws with regard to the innocent shooting of a third person is different than what we have in Texas. But I agree that people can see that, and everyone should certainly be separate, and I certainly tried to be that way. And I think that you can see in some of my cases that I've not only, what I come back to is, sure, I've written some cases dealing with traffic stops or something that I think are really, really good. But at the same time, I also recognize, look, some of these traffic offenses, I wrote this in a case called State versus Cortez, the tie has to go to the defense. If you don't know what the statute says one way or the other, it has to go to the defense. And that's called the rule of lenity. And it was actually codified in Texas. So I had some support for that. But the whole idea is that, we are supposed to be, courts are really supposed to be a check on the prosecution, on the government, on governmental overreach. So that's one of the things that we have to take very seriously. But I mean, if you're concerned at all about the kind of, I've also been a person that has joined in overturning death sentences when I think the law requires it, which is what I'll do. If the law requires me to do that, I will do that. I've been very, very strong on innocence cases where people have been wrongfully convicted. And I've written a number of opinions on the subject of granting relief to those who've been wrongfully convicted. So when there's a situation where the law calls for that kind of correction, I'll do it. When there's a situation where the law says that the police officers acted reasonably, I can say that too. But that's part of being a good judge, of being fair.
Let me ask you, Your Honor. A lot of people that's African American, they will just go down the ticket and they'll just pick the nearest African American that they can pick. I'm not like that. I research my candidates. I don't really care what color they are as long as they can do the job. But we also know that the African American vote is very important in politics. So what would you tell an African American that's trying to figure out who should they vote for in your race? Why should they vote for you?
Well, I mean, obviously, you're talking about a race of two white guys. That's the one thing I would say about that. But I mean, other than that, I think that, from what I can say with regard to my record, I think you would just look at my record and say, look, this is a guy that will stand up for, to correct injustices, that will write opinions that correct those injustices. Like the example I gave to you about the when I was a prosecutor, but more than that, I've written opinions and I've written several opinions dealing with granting relief for actual innocence. I routinely criticize folks when they don't want to defer, even when all the parties agree that relief should be granted. Some people on the court don't want to do that. I'm one of the people that is constantly saying, no, we should. Texas is known as being having a lot of death penalty cases, and some cases deserve to be upheld, but other cases don't. And I actually was one of the votes on a case where we said, look, this isn't a capital murder case. This needs to be overturned. That takes a lot of courage to do at that level, and I've done it consistently. And so, if I would say something, I can't speak for the African American community, but I assume that they want someone that's going to be fair. You want to be protected as much as you don't want to be the victim of police misconduct or things like that. And I am fair, and that's the way that I try to be a judge, and I try to be, like I said, I try to question my unconscious biases, my implicit biases. But when it comes to making decisions, obviously I really don't make a decision based upon the color of anyone's skin. That would be a violation of my oath. I just try to be fair and call like I see it, and I think that's what everyone wants.
Well, we interact with the audience, so I'm gonna read a comment from Niall Copeland. The district judge that declared Texas has to have straight ticket voting despite the legislators voting against it. Would you consider that legislating from the bench?
Well, I'm not familiar enough with the statute from what they're and from with the opinion to be able to say that. But it does seem like the legislature said that this is what we're going to do away with. They actually did it several years ago, and this is also after the ballots have already been mailed out. So, it does seem like I question whether or not the legal reasoning in that opinion is sound. But I haven't read the court's opinion. And so I couldn't tell you that.
Demetra?
Okay, so I kind of want to stay with Gary's original question about African Americans. And so Texas has, I guess, the third largest death row population in the nation. California, where I am, is the first.
Right.
African Americans make up about 13% of the population there in Texas, but make up 44% of the death row population, to that of about 27 white, and then 26. And of course, I'm probably preaching to the choir, all those statistics. But in your opinion, and because I want to ask you a few questions in regards to this, why do you think that's the case? Why do you think African Americans make up the most of the death row population, but are least in population there in Texas?
I couldn't hazard a guess for that. As far as why it is, I think that there's that disparate impact. Other than I would have to make a lot of assumptions about the African American community to do that. But I would assume that something has to do with, one of the splits I see isn't necessarily so much with regard to race, but you see indigent defense versus non-indigent defense. And once you have appointed counsel, that's been something that Texas has really been wrestling with over a long period of time. They're trying to fix those things. But that can lead to poor representation, can lead to some people not getting their day in court or not getting their claims heard, versus having a non-appointed or not a non-indigent defense or non-appointed attorney. You might have a little better luck. And so I guess something that might have something to do with that. I have nothing to do, however, with the way that who charges, who deceives the death penalty, and that also has something to do with it. You have to be eligible by the prosecution to do that, and I've never had anything to do with that decision. But that could also lead to why it is. You just have people picking one versus or another. But that's the best I could come up with.
Okay, and then and also I guess says since 1973, 170 inmates have had their cases, death row inmates had their cases overturned due to wrongful convictions. But it also says that Texas has killed, if you will, quite a few innocent people. But one of the things I noticed as I was doing my research on you, you are one of your points of interest is, I guess, wrongful convictions, and I guess trying to, I don't know if overturn them is the right word, but I guess you wrote a lot of, I guess I can't figure out the word I'm trying to say. but opinions maybe in regards to wrongful convictions and have actually gotten some of those cases overturned. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. One of the things that, I mean, part of the thing too, when you're talking about the population, you're also, one of the things is that a lot of people just see this number, but they're not, they don't sort of conceive that this is over a long period of time, right? You're dealing with a backlog of a lot of cases while the law regarding the death sentence has also changed. You know, there's been a lot of problems with jury instructions, in fact, from the United States Supreme Court that have had to have cases come back and retried because of things like that. And so, but I'm saying all these things to say, you know, I've got on the court to try and be someone that can help the court, fix the court, and help make the court move in the direction where you're making decisions about things like intellectual disability based upon science, you know, based upon, which is what the United States Supreme Court has said that they want us to do with actual diagnostic criteria. And another big thing that is important to me as far as wrongful convictions, and particularly with regard to actual innocence, is that, you know, one of the things that Texas does do that I don't think Texas sort of people recognize is Texas is uniquely suited to be granting actual innocence relief. And the reason for that is we have the Texas Constitution gives the Court of Criminal Appeals fact-finding ability, and meaning we can reweigh those cases in where we can reweigh the facts that were presented at trial versus new evidence that comes to light that shows that someone didn't do the crime, and we can say that person is innocent, and we can declare them innocent so that they can get their name back. And that's one of the things that's been very important to me, starting with a case called Ex parte Mayhew, which was dealing with 4 women who were wrongfully convicted in San Antonio, and it was actually featured in a documentary and the southwest of Salem. And one of the insights that I had with that was, you know, a lot of times Texas is very, very generous with regard to compensation for those who've been wrongfully convicted compared to other states. And that tends to lead to arguments about, well, is this about compensation? And my insight in that case was, this starts with making sure that if that person has been wrongfully convicted, they never should have been jailed in the first place. And so you have to start to make it right. And the thing that starts is you need a court. You need a court to declare that person actually innocent so that they can have their name back, so that they can start to re-enter society and make up for whatever time that they lost. It's not money. It's not just the money. It's being told that they're innocent. And that's a big thing that I've done. And I've been very consistent about that because, like I said, when you have a system, like no system is perfect. There's things that are going to go wrong. You need safety valves. And that's a big safety valve in Texas, is that at the end of in the writ of habeas corpus, you can come to the court and you can say, look, I appreciate that there was a discrete problem at the trial with the evidence, and that may not have made a difference, whatever, but I've got new evidence here that points in a completely different direction. And we need to be able to correct that. You need to have a vehicle to correct that. And so I've been very, very passionate about that. If there's one thing that I can say that my legacy would be if I am not reelected, it's my contribution to that area of the law. But it's something that does mean something a great deal to me, because I saw when I was a prosecutor, it became very easy just handling as a line prosecutor. Just the decision to charge someone really changes their life, you know. And this is not to take away also from, you know, the victims of crime. Like a crime, when you're charging someone, it goes through a criminal case, it affects a lot of people, has a really human cost. You know, and once you bring someone into the system, it's really hard to get them out. And so you need to make sure that the people that shouldn't be brought in should not be brought in. But if there's something that's wrong, we should have the flexibility and have a dynamic way to correct that.
Okay, so my last question. Most African Americans believe that, especially there in Texas, that the death row population is to the tune of 44% due to racism. Off the top of your head, would you agree with that?
Well, you know, I can't really speak to that. You know, I understand. I guess I would say this. Regardless, it doesn't really matter whether I agree with that. That's what I hear, and I can't say that's unreasonable. You know what I mean? I just like, you know, we can argue about the vehicle or the systemic nature of racism and things like that. But at the end of the day, you know, if you can say, you know, at the end of the day, every time you see one of these events happening on TV, you know, one of these police officer killings are happening on TV, why wouldn't a community look at that and see racism? You know, so I hear that. I absolutely do hear that.
So I'm going to ask you a question.
It's down. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I got two questions. One might cost you some votes, so be very careful how you answer this.
Great.
Favorite NFL team?
I appreciate that.
Favorite NFL team? Favorite college team? Let me hear it.
My favorite college team is UT Longhorns because that's where I went to. That's where I went to law school. So that's going to lose me some votes, I know. And this is really going to be a difficult one, but I got to say, I'm a Patriots fan. I know. It's tough. Part of the reason why I'm a Patriots fan though has to do with the fact that I remember them before Brady when they sucked. And that's kind of the thing. And actually, I'll elaborate a little bit more on that too. The other thing I like about them is they take these guys that have no business playing in the NFL and they make them stars. You know, like Wes Welker, tiny dude. Danny Woodhead, that dude, and yet they end up leading in catches and things like that. That's the thing I like, and that when they're at their best, that they're very team oriented. But I understand all the criticism as well. But that's the reason why. That's sort of why I've come to like them.
Oh yeah, and one of the greatest quarterbacks of all times.
Sure.
Being there. But my second question is, and I'm taking this from the audience there, what is your stance on qualified immunity? I mean, this country is founded on one man, one vote. Nobody is above the law. So what is your stance as a judge on qualified immunity, and should it be repealed?
Well, you know, the thing that you say that too, qualified immunity is a court-created doctrine, and I get, you know, that comes from the United States Supreme Court, really. And one of the things that I have to do is I follow precedent, regardless of whether I agree with it. I have to follow that precedent. Now, if there's a problem with it, you know, I certainly hear people that cry out that they want to get rid of it. The best way to handle that is through the legislature, and if they do, then I will follow that law too. You know, but my job is not really to be a policy person to say this is good law or this is bad law. If there's precedent, then I'm certainly bound to follow it.
Well, I'm gonna hit you with this one, and maybe it goes to you guys, but maybe it doesn't. The Gerald Goins case is unique because it come to find out we got about 15,000 cases that may need to be overturned because of some questionable things that he did as a police officer. How hard is it going to be? You know, because I know it's almost impossible to get a writ of habeas corpus done. You know, once you take that deal, you know, if people don't understand that, I think the judge could explain it to you. Once you take that deal, you kind of locked in. So do you guys, is that something that comes to you guys? And if it does, 15,000 cases, I think y'all going to be pretty busy overturning 15,000.
Well, I mean, let's put it this way. Yes, those kinds of cases are going to come to us, which is pretty much why I can't really talk about it. Like, I could talk to you about it and I can tell you about one case that I actually did, a case called Otis Mallet. I wrote an opinion on that. You can look that one up. But as far as, I can't really get into these cases that might be pending, because then I wouldn't be able to participate in it.
Well, let me reframe the question. If somebody goes to court and they take a plea deal and say they were pressured into taking the deal, you know, because sometimes that happens. If we look at the Central Park 5, they were pressured into taking that deal. How hard is it to get a writ of habeas corpus done when, you know, as a kid, I know I didn't do this. They forced me basically to take the deal. Why is it so hard, and how tough is it to get it done?
Well, it certainly is. It is certainly very difficult. When you're talking about a writ of habeas corpus, you're talking at the very end of sort of the proceedings. And part of that has to do with, which goes back to exactly what I was saying earlier. When someone is brought into the system, it's you know, that's a really big changing thing. It's a lot harder once they're in the system for them to get out. But once there's a verdict, which is what the plea is going to be, right? Once there's a plea, there's a presumption. All the presumptions shift away from you know, the favor of the citizen to the regularity of the proceedings. And that's what a lot of law says, which is why it becomes so difficult. Now, you can raise a plea, like if you take a plea, you may still be able to challenge some of the things that were raised prior to your plea, like a motion or something. You can do that on direct appeal. But once you get to the writ, you have to show that basically you were given bad information. And once you were given bad information that made your decision, and that affected your decision making, then you can undo your plea. But that's it. And it is a very challenging area of law to overcome, a very challenge to overcome. So it's pretty hard.
Ms. Demetra.
So, how many appeals do you all see a year, and how many actually get overturned? Like, what's the ratio, the percentage?
I sure don't know what the ratio is for how they're overturned, but I can tell you that in a given year, we'll see something in the neighborhood, including writs, death penalty cases, direct appeals, that we take for discretionary review. We'll see anywhere between 6,000 to 10,000 a year. So it's a lot. We have a lot of cases we have to look at. I don't know what the level is for them to be overturned, because, like I said, I'm just trying to do the best job I can with the cases I have in front of me. And I've never been terribly impressed with sort of like looking at these statistics, because what is it? Mark Twain says there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. And I think that you can take statistics and you can make something out of that any way you want. But for another reason why things are not being overturned is it also depends on our discretionary review, whether we've taken cases that need to be overturned, whether the courts of appeals have gotten it right or wrong. And so there's a lot of factors that will weigh into that, which is why I just have never paid attention to that.
What is, if you could talk about it, the most egregious case that has come before you that you said, like, how did this even get a guilty, a guilty verdict? And I guess, did you all decide to overturn?
Well, I don't know. The first one that comes to my mind, I mean, obviously there's a number of cases where I would say that. I certainly, Greg Kelly was a pretty bad example. That was one that was featured in the Showtime documentary. But that was one where everything it was just a perfect storm. Everything just sort of went wrong with the proceeding. And you really had the most bare minimum of a case. And then you have all this other additional information. But each of those kinds of cases where you have to overturn them are pretty bad in their own way. I mean, even going back to the San Antonio Ford case that I wrote on, I mean, that was a situation where you can understand why the prosecution had to go forward. You had two girls saying that they'd been sexually assaulted, but their story didn't make any sense. And they only barely had some physical evidence. And we'll come to find out, once you find out that, look, the husband or the father of these kids has been beating the kids to indoctrinate them to give this story. It's pretty egregious and pretty terrible. So that's one of the reasons why you go, oh my gosh, how did this happen? But you have to make do, and you have to correct it. You have to do what you can to correct it, which is what we did. So I mean, both of those are examples of cases I gave where we actually did actually grant relief. So another one I had mentioned the Otis Mallett case. That was a situation where you had an alleged drug deal hand-hand drug deal where the defendant's like, I didn't do this, and no one ever handled the drugs, and there was some discussion that there was a controlled buy, but there was no record of controlled buy ever happening. It was all based on this one word of this one police officer, and it was just, I mean, it was like, at the time, if you believe the police officer, it makes sense, but when you now know that you can't believe the police officer, it's pretty egregious there too.
All right, so we're moving right along here. Hey, another question from the audience. From hearing an appeal, how long before an opinion is written?
It depends on what the appeal is about. It depends on what the subject matter is. Like, for example, a death penalty case is going to have can have anywhere from like 10 to 44 issues. So that'll take a long period of time. But sometimes you'll get a discretionary review case that is one issue, and you can handle it relatively quickly. I've seen cases turned around, in a few months. It also depends on when the parties get the briefs to us and when they have the briefs, so that we can look at those and we can listen to their arguments, see what their arguments are. But I sort of, like, my rule of thumb is always something like you shoot for something like 6 months is what you shoot for.
Okay, cool. And a quick follow-up. Of course, you're a judge, and you went to law school, and you're everybody thinks of lawyers as part of the biggest problem in America. No, but that's where the big money is and everything like that. So hypothetically, or not even hypothetically, the COVID has changed the way elections are going right now. So you're doing a lot of shows and things of that nature. But why? Let's just say you want to retire from judging. I'm not even going to say you're going to lose or nothing like that. But let's just say you decide to retire after winning election in this cycle. I mean, what do you do after? Do you go back into private practice and make more money, or do you just, get your fishing pole and head on down to the lake? And
no, you go back to work. I'd have to go back to work. I don't know. I would probably have to go into private practice. I'd have to, one of the things that's been really difficult, the first thing would be that I get to go home. One of the things that when I ran, the court is in Austin, Texas, so that's the capital. But I live in Missouri City, home of Travis Scott. But I grew up just outside of Houston, and so I've been living. And so the thought was that it would take us a little while. We were going to have my family move up to Austin, and within about 3 months of me being on the court, my wife's father passed away, and we didn't want her mom to be without her family. And so I've been commuting this whole time. So I'll spend like a third of my life on the way up to Austin, a third of my life in Missouri City, sometimes even less. And then of course, a third of my life in my car. And it's really difficult. So the first thing I would probably do is I would probably go home. And the next step would probably be to look for work as a defense attorney, or maybe see if I could work in the university, in a law school or something like that. But I believe I'm a long way away from retirement. I hope I am. And I certainly hope to have the opportunity to continue to work and serve for the citizens of Texas.
So I have a question. We know that over the weekend, President Trump nominated Amy Barrett to the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, as to be a potential justice, if you will. Now, and I believe you to be a Republican, if I'm not mistaken. The Republicans decided a while back that they wouldn't nominate a Supreme Court justice, I guess, a couple of months or even now weeks, or a month or so before election. What are your thoughts on them doing that right after RBG passed away?
Well, I understand the frustration. I absolutely do, because I remember seeing everyone so angry about Merrick Garland, particularly. I do remember seeing that. But I think that when you look at the history on all of those things, you go back and look at it, it's always been about power. And everyone has been moving the lines as they've gone. And so I appreciate saying, you can say that's hypocrisy there, but you're only looking at a small window. You can look back and say, well, there's hypocrisy here. And no one has clean hands in that regard. This is just part of this long process of removing these barriers. And I understand why people don't like it. I certainly do. But that's above my pay grade. I don't make those decisions.
One more question. I hope this is not too tough of a question, but your part of your campaign slogan says that you're about people, right? You're about people. And from what we understand, Amy Barrett, her ideologies line up with that of Trump. And specifically, they're saying that she is in agreement with getting rid of the Affordable Care Act. And so we know the Affordable Care Act is actually for people, that helps people who, for a whole host of reasons, cannot get health care. And so what are your thoughts on that, of them potentially getting rid of the Affordable Care Act, and they're going to use her to do that if she is so confirmed?
If she does it, then she does it. I tend to be, the United States Supreme Court does a lot of things, and I don't, I'm bound to follow their precedent. That's what I do. And so because of that, I've especially as time has gone on with regard to the Supreme Court, I hide and watch. And I just sort of wait to see what happens. So I don't know that I don't know that I feel she's going to do that, but I also question whether or not we can guarantee that she would. I think that you've seen a number of different judges that are selected. You think they're going to do one thing and then they don't. And so I just think that, I don't know. And so I guess I will wait and see what happens and choose to be frustrated, angry, upset, or satisfied, whatever the answer is, once I see what they do.
We got a question from Carlos Johnson, and she asked, how does the court decide, or the judge decides, how much monetary money someone will get when a case is decided?
Well, we don't do any of that. Actually, like if you're talking about sentencing as far as who's going to get paid a fine, like in criminal cases, whether they'll be assigned a fine or whether they're assigned, whatever fees, those are things that are decided well before they get to the appellate court. So we never actually make those decisions. And then in civil cases, when you're looking at what the monetary amount's going to happen when someone is, when someone goes to a civil suit, that's going to be, depending on what the agreement is with the lawyers and the parties. And then, of course, it'll depend on what the verdict is and if the jury makes a verdict of a particular monetary amount, or if it goes to a judge, that judge makes that monetary amount. But it's a normative decision, and it's really just sort of up to that judge to do it. But like I said, we don't make the decision on how much money or to give or not give. We just say, was this within the judge's discretion to make that call?
My next question is, and I'm studying criminal justice, so I just did an assignment, and I've been quiet for 4 days, so I've been doing assignments and tests. And one of the questions that I saw in the book, and I actually got a judge, so I can ask him, how hard is it for you guys to be impartial?
That's a tough question. I like to believe that I'm impartial, and like I said, I like to question my assumptions all the time to try and maintain that I'm impartial. Part of that has to do with how honest you're able to be with yourself about what your own biases or not are. And so I think that's something that you have to work on every day, is I guess a way to answer that. But at the end of the day, I believe that all of my colleagues work very, very hard to be impartial, and I believe that they succeed.
Now, I tell you, I asked that question, Demetri, because it was like a two-pronged question. Well, it was a question, then it was a statement. And they brought up like Judge Lance Ito from the OJ case, which I felt that he couldn't be impartial. And the reason I felt that he could not be impartial, because his wife was tied to the case. In all actuality, he should have recused himself from that case. And because he did not, he sat on that case. And I just feel some of the things that he did, I did not agree with. I wasn't even studying at all at that point, but it just didn't make sense. So when I saw this question yesterday when I was doing my assignment, I'm like, man, I got to ask a judge, how hard is it to be impartial? Because I know some days decisions are influenced by politics, whether they want to admit it or not. Some judges, they rule, depending on the courts that they sit in, they rule based on their party affiliation, and it's just a raw deal some days when we can just look at, the actual evidence and just rule that way. So that was my question. I turned it over to Demetri.
Donovan, did you have a question?
Yeah. Because I got to go at 5. Got to do some flying. But here's a good question for you, Judge. And a lot of people don't really understand this. Being a judge now in the 60s, and I think even in the 50s, as a matter of fact, Woody Harrelson's father was convicted for killing a judge. I mean, so how dangerous is it to be a judge? And, you have a family and things of that nature. So I'm glad you're kind of commuting that might help you, but you're on the appellate court. But still, being a judge and things like that, does that ever come into your mind? Like, man, bad things can happen here if a certain thing isn't ruled a certain way.
Well, I don't know that it ever comes to my mind with regard to the way I would rule. I don't think that when I look at an opinion, I go, Woody Harrelson's dad could kill me if I do something. I don't. But I will say, and I do that because it's a very serious topic, and I try to keep things light. But I will say that we've had death threats. Our court has had them, and it is something that I am cognizant about. It's one of the reasons why I'm a little bit more private about where I live, like address, things like that. And they allow us to take that information off. So it is something that you have to be worried about. And one of the reasons I don't have state license plates. There's 2 reasons I don't have state license plates, but one of them is, one of the privileges of you can get state license plates. And I'm like, well, that could make me a target. So why would I do that? But the other thing is that I just think it's putting on airs. Like, okay, I'll have to do a little bit extra work to find a good parking space. It's not really worth it.
Well, before I go, I'll be out in like 5 or 10 minutes. I just want to wish you the best of luck. I really liked a lot of things that you were saying here today.
Thank you.
Please come back after you win the election so we can do a little follow-up with you as well. So
Be happy
Great.
to. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
And I would say this too. I'm gonna kind of throw you a Hail Mary there. So I listened to an interview of yours that you did not too long ago, and you were talking about a dear friend of yours that was sexually assaulted.
Correct.
And so I guess that kind of played a role in why you are a judge or into the legal field, if you will. But then a minute ago, you were saying how when I asked you about one of the most egregious cases that you had to rule upon, and you said it was that of a sexual assault case. And so I want to say, you know, he didn't know I was going to ask that or even look at that interview. I would say that makes you impartial, you know, to have experienced that and then be able to say, wait a minute, you know, this case before me doesn't wash. So I would say that does make you very impartial.
Thank you very much for adding that. Yeah, that is the interview that you're referring to, like, just so everyone else who's watching would know, like, that was the reason I went to law school. I wasn't going to be a lawyer. I wasn't even going to be a prosecutor. I was going to be a writer, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to do this since I was 5, and I went to college. And when I was in college, about halfway through, close to the end, a good friend of mine was sexually assaulted, and I didn't know how to talk to her. And so I'm saying this because I remember said earlier about how I try to listen to understand. I try to understand is that's one of the things that that whole process taught me, was the need to do this, because I volunteered at the Women's Center answering the rape crisis hotline to try and help better communicate with my friend, and also to try and help out the community. And when I did that, I realized I wasn't going to be as much service to the community as I would be if I went to be a lawyer and went to be a prosecutor. And so that's why I did go into UT Law. I went to UT Law, and then I got out and I went to Fort Bend, which is where I live, and that's where I started being a prosecutor.
Well, I definitely want to thank you for your service, and for those that don't get it, I'm gonna ask this question because a lot of people want us to ask certain questions. Can you explain what judicial canons are for judges and how serious they are?
Well, they're very serious. Like, I can give you the real technical thing. When people say canons, there's a difference between canons and rules, and so to be a little inside baseball, but rules are the things that you govern. Lawyers have rules of professional conduct, and they'll say specifically do X, Y, or Z. Don't do X, Y, or Z. Canons is much more aspirational, and they're sort of principles. Be impartial, and a lot of things can fall under that, and that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing that they're less specific, because at the end of the day, you want judges to be trying and aspiring to fill in those gaps, you know, where they don't know, so that they're trying to make sure they avoid the appearance of impropriety, which is one of the reasons why I'm very sorry that I couldn't answer some of your questions, because if I did, then people might think that might be a problem that would violate these canons, and those things can lead to sanctions where I'm kicked off the bench. So canons are very, very serious, and that's because you want to make sure that your judges are going to be fair and impartial, and you can guarantee that. One of the discussions too about sort of Lance Ito and his wife, I mean, that's one of the things that they have to do, is they have to look at sort of the appearance, and that appearance, if it causes you to lose faith in that judge being impartial, that judge can be asked to step aside. And so that's one of the things like canons are meant to prevent, is that appearance of impropriety.
Yeah, because some people they don't understand that. And honestly, we're speaking about judicial canons. Some people tonight, that's your first time hearing about it. So, you know, you really have to understand, like, he couldn't answer the Goins question because those appeals are going to end up in their court.
Yeah.
Then he wouldn't be able to hear them. So, you know, it's like that. My thing is man, it's tough when you're out doing the right thing. And I tell people, when it comes to judges, you know, I wouldn't want to sit up there. On some cases, I wouldn't want to sit up there, because I'm going to be honest. Can you imagine old 5-star sitting on the bench and they coming out, say, man, all y'all need to go to jail, man. They be to kick me off the bench in 2 days. So, you know, I appreciate what you do. My African-American community, no matter where you may be, especially in the state of Texas, you're looking for good people. to sit on these benches right now. Y'all know we got some issues in these courtrooms. So, you know, research your candidates. If you ask me tonight who I'm voting for in that race, I'm voting for Judge David Newell. When I go back and I research him and I research the cases, I see fairness. I see compassion from him as a judge. And a lot of days, you know, you see, the judge, they don't remember, and Demetri, you don't know. How many of y'all went up in Ted Poe courtroom? Did you see some compassion in Ted Poe courtroom? When he had you on the side of the freeway with them signs and all that? Now you got some highly educated people sitting in the courtroom, and you need to make sure that we keep them in there. So I want to thank you for your service, Judge, and I'm going to get out here and I'm going to stomp for you, my friend, and try to get some more people to vote for you just like I'm going to vote for you.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, and I would just really say in closing to everybody that's watching, you know, really do your due diligence and educate yourself about what is going on, especially in the judicial arena, because especially as Black people, those are the elections, since we're in election season, that really affect us. And so get educated about the people who sit on those benches. But I would also say I agree. I like what I see here. I can't vote for you, but you're the incumbent, so I believe you'll do fine. But anyway, good luck on your race. We hope to see you after you win.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much.
I tell y'all what, we're going to stir up some drama tomorrow night. Our guest, Fred Taylor, running for mayor of Missouri City, Texas. And if y'all don't know what's going on out in Missouri City, Texas, you finna get a wake-up call tomorrow night, I can promise you that. So I want to thank you, Judge, for taking the time out. And I always say this here. Come and hang out with the two intelligent Black people and the crazy Black Republican. I really appreciate it. And y'all remember, research your candidates. Don't just go in that voting booth and straight ticket. Go in that voting booth with a clear conscience that you know who you are voting for. Because if you go straight ticket, and Demetri, I'm going to leave them with this, and you vote for some of them people finna go to jail. I want to thank y'all for tuning in to the Crooked Show in social media history. It's the War Zone. My man Donovan Sadiq had to go because, you know, he fly planes. But I sat here the rest of the night with my good friend, the Queen, Demetri K. And make sure that when you go in the voting booth, you take care of my man, Judge David Newell. Say it's what it is, man. I don't see a Republican. I don't see a Democrat. I see a good person. And that's what we need. But be careful who you vote for on election day, because some of them people going to jail. Watch what I tell y'all. Until tomorrow night, Fred Taylor running for mayor in Missouri City, Texas is going to be a good one. We'll holler at y'all.